As the cost of living soars, drivers in New South Wales will get up to $750 cash back each year as part of a major toll relief overhaul. Around 500,000 motorists will get quarterly rebates in a plan to be included in this month's budget. Joining me now live to discuss is the New South Wales Labor leader, Chris Minns. Chris, thank you very much for joining us. Before we get to that news, I want to just quickly touch on State of Origin. New South Wales losing Game 1 last night. Do you think that the Blues can claw their way back if they're not playing at home for the next two matches?
Yeah, I do think they can. They're a young team. They're very committed. They play hard together, and they were a bit unlucky last night with a few calls. So onwards and upwards from here.
Absolutely. Fingers crossed. All right, let's get back to the toll relief, the state government's toll cashback plan. Do you support this?
Look, at the end of the day, they're taking away one of the rebate programs that's already in place, which is a free registration program, and putting in a grant program that you have to apply for. So for many people, they'll receive about $190 extra per year. But as you know, in Sydney at the moment, we're the most tolled city on the face of the earth. Some families in Western Sydney are paying multiples of thousands of dollars each and every year to use the toll roads. There's no new public transport infrastructure for many communities in that part of Sydney, so they're forced to use these toll roads, which the New South Wales government fully privatised about 6 months ago. So it's a really daunting situation for thousands of families that live in that part of Sydney.
You mentioned that Sydney is the most tolled place in the world. What evidence do you have to support that?
Sydney University have said twice that it's the most tolled city on the face of the earth per kilometre of tolled road. And you know the New South Wales government, over the last decade that they've been in power, have prioritised toll roads, particularly for Western Sydney, and brand new public transport infrastructure for those living east of Parramatta. Now, as a result of that, you've got a massively and rapidly increasing population base for the suburbs of Blacktown, Camden, Liverpool, Campbelltown. But they don't have the public transport infrastructure that they need to get to and from work and to see family and friends. There's a real inequity in Australia's largest city.
This is obviously an ongoing issue with toll roads in the state, but more so than ever now as cost of living soars. What would Labor do about the tolls if you were in power?
Look, the first thing, and this is what I said the day I was elected as New South Wales Labor leader, is we would have stopped the New South Wales government from privatising the toll roads in Sydney. We now have a 100% privately owned toll road monopoly in the most tolled city on the face of the earth. And we're in a ridiculous situation where for the last 2 years, the New South Wales government has been telling everybody there's no problem with tolls and privatisation is working. Just the last few days, they've been forking out millions of dollars to pay, in effect, to Transurban, the same company that bought those toll roads off the government not too long ago. So we've really got a toll road monster in New South Wales. It's a challenge for any political party when trying to deal with the cost of living. But really, they shouldn't have made a bad situation far worse by creating this monopoly for millions of users in New South Wales.
I want to ask you about yesterday's strike action by unions. Despite the Premier announcing a 3% pay increase for public sector workers, unions still want a pay rise to match inflation. Realistically, in the current economic environment, is that even viable?
Well, we believe that there should be a movement towards a productivity-based bargaining system in New South Wales, something similar to what they've got in Queensland, where you can negotiate not just on wages but also classifications and conditions in the public service. We think that's the best way of getting a fair wage deal for frontline workers while protecting the New South Wales government's bottom line and also producing world-class public services for the people of this state. That's not happening in New South Wales. We've got a wage cap that prioritises conflict between the workforce and the New South Wales government, and we're not getting good outcomes in New South Wales. I also think Mr Perrottet can't have it both ways. We are the highest tax state in any jurisdiction in Australia. Tolls, taxes, fees, fines, charges are all going through the roof at the same time as Mr Perrottet is holding down the ability to meet those obligations with his position on wages.
But in terms of a pay rise to match inflation, won't that just add to the current economic woes?
Well, if you have productivity within your economy, whether it's the public sector or the private sector, or preferably both, then you can have wage growth over time and not unnecessarily add to the inflation burden. That's certainly been the model in New South Wales and Australia prior to the last decade. In the last decade, we haven't had much wage growth at all. Right at the moment, when interest rates are going up, petrol is going up, energy prices are going up, and as we've been speaking about, tolls are going through the roof. So at the moment, the government is asking teachers, firefighters, police officers to carry the burden of the costs of the New South Wales government while not doing anything to help them pay for it.
We are running out of time, but just quickly, the Premier said he will spend about $743 million on palliative care, essentially conceding that he's failed in his previous role to adequately fund end-of-life treatment. Can I just get your reaction firstly to that? Do you think that that's adequate enough?
A good initiative, and I'm going to praise Mr Perrottet for this. It's exactly what we need. I'm glad there's an attention in relation to palliative care. It's urgently required. I'm encouraged that it's part of the New South Wales budget. I'm not going to knock him for it. The government's made the right call here.
Labor leader Chris Minns, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Danica.